Welcome. And thank you for coming this afternoon on this beautiful spring day, which makes it easier for the speaker to not have to deal with snow. My name is Chuck Putney. I'm involved in the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here, and this talk is hosted by the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and it is sponsored or underwritten by the Vermont Humanities Council. The Vermont Humanities Council is a statewide organization that is committed to increasing public engagement in the humanities through Speakers Bureau, book discussion groups, and other kinds of public programming designed to help people engage with the humanities. It's an organization I love well, and actually 25 years ago was president of, but that was a long time ago. So it's a real pleasure today, under the auspices of the Council on Humanities Speakers Bureau, to welcome Meg Mott, who is emeritus professor at Marlborough College, where she taught political theory and constitutional law. She was a professor of politics, and she also has her hands in as moderator in the town of Putney, which is no relation. And what I do want to say is I have some flyers about a session next month on the second Sunday. Herbert Ogden of Mount Tabor is going to speak about the church, the state, and public schools, and the recent decisions which allow for school districts to pay for religious instruction when they tuition students into private schools. So that I have information on that, and also on that sheet, whether you want to come to that session or not, at the bottom I have a web link so that you can, if you'd like, evaluate this program for the benefit of the Humanities Council. So without further ado, welcome Meg Mott, and up to the podium to talk about a dramatic constitution.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Unitarian Universalist Church, Fellowship Hall in Bennington. It's great for me to be able to talk about the Constitution. I pretty much can't stop talking about the Constitution, and so when I'm actually get an audience, it feels a little better, because otherwise it's me in my house. I have my office in the basement. If any of you are Machiavelli enthusiasts, you may know this letter that Machiavelli wrote in 15-something or other when he was exiled from Florence, and he couldn't do the politics that he loved to do. So what did he do? He went into his office, he put on a very nice outfit, and then he read old books, and he went to history. And he said that those books could talk to him in such a way that they allowed him his full humanity. And I feel about that, like Machiavelli, when I think about the Constitution, read those words, hear about how people came up with these ideas, and most interestingly, debated whether it was actually a good idea. So before we get started, I do have some PowerPoint presentation for you. I have some slides. But before we get started, just to be in the spirit of what is the Constitution and what is it all about, we should ask ourselves, maybe it's okay, but maybe it's not. Really, at the heart of the Constitution, I think, is the question for all of us to ask ourselves, is this a good way to do business? Is this a good way to organize ourselves or not? And if not, what should we do? But let's start with giving the Constitution the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to shout things out again because this is being recorded. Thank you, Tim, from the local community television. So this will be recorded, and if you ask a question, I'm going to come running over here and repeat it so that everybody can hear. Okay, so, but my thing's way over there. We'll figure this out. I may have to shout for a little bit. Could somebody give me some reason why it is useful to abide by the Constitution? And I shall jot it down here. Yes, and could you tell me your name?
Robin Tarnas.
Robin, yeah.
That be, because every other form of government is worse.
Ah, that's really true. Somebody said that, didn't they? So, is it Robert or Robin?
Robin.
Robin. So every other form is worse. Great. So that's one way. And I think that was maybe what Churchill said about democracy or something of that sort. And we do have a constitutional democracy. Any others? Yes, and can you tell me your name?
Ray Basil,
Ray.
try to be civilized.
The Constitution helps us be civilized. Yeah, and I see some people nodding. Do you want to expand on that? Why do you think the Constitution helps us be civilized?
Certain laws, certain things to abide by, like you're supposed to.
Yeah, just the fact that people are abiding by a law is a good thing.
Well,
Or?
it depends on the law.
Oh, yes,
Depends on the law.
good. Yeah, so it may help us be civilized if
It depends on.
If they're good laws.
if it's a good law.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And your name is?
Suzanne.
Suzanne. If it's a good law, we want to make sure we're not just going to be following any law. It's got to be a good law. But you're saying, Ray, that if we actually follow a law and it's a good law, we might be better people. The person who's with you is nodding. I can't see you're not nodding. Yeah.
It's my life, so yes.
Yes, okay, so I want to make sure, yeah, if it's a good law, then we might become better people, and therefore, that is a reason to abide by the Constitution. Yeah, and your name?
Jill,
Jill.
a caveat to that one
Mm-hmm.
is that bad laws can be abridged. And our Constitution allows us
Mm-hmm.
to propose, hopefully pass amendments
Mm-hmm.
which will address growing or current situations, circumstances.
So, Jill, do you feel like the fact that the Constitution has an amendment process is one of the reasons why it's worth following?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
it's not, some believe it's rigid, I believe it's not rigid.
Yeah, the amendment process means that it is not rigid. It can be perfected. It can become better.
It can grow.
It can grow, yeah. So that's going to be a key thing. Yes, and your name?
I'm Kathy.
Kathy.
At a real basic level, it gives us a construct to work under.
Oh, nice. And Kathy, what do you mean by construct?
A set of principles, social contracts, laws.
Right. But something that's promulgated, something that you know, you can find out what it is. And that it's principles, and then this is a key thing, Kathy, for you, is that it's a social construct. By abiding by this Constitution, we're a part of something.
Yeah.
And so there's an obligation. It's not just we follow the laws, but it's almost as if the government has got to have these good laws so that it's worthwhile for us to follow them.
Yes.
Yeah. I've got room for one more in the back, yes.
Just sort of adding to the others, provides a framework for a balance of power through checks and balances.
And could you give me your name?
Chris,
Chris. Kathy was for the construct, Chris is for, I'm not gonna be able to do that with separation of powers, but that's all right. We try and remember. There's something, Chris, can you just tell us a little bit more of why you feel separation of powers? Because we got from Kathy this idea that it's a form. But that feels very important to you. Why is that?
Well, it's more that it's the system that we have, which is a balance of power, supposedly a balance of power.
Oh.
We aim for that.
Right, okay. It's not just separation, what I wrote. You said balance of power. So is there something about the fact that the power is separated and that there is something, it's almost like a mobile, right? If I could like snap my fingers and this magical mobile would appear and it would have a legislative branch and a judicial branch. And then it would have an executive branch. And it would be even more complicated because then it would have 50 states. And then I'd have to have something for the Administrative Procedural Act and the administrative state. But that mobile would all be there holding itself up because it has that balance that's so important. Wow, this is great. You guys are clearly knowledgeable about the Constitution. So I'm going to have a next page. You know what that one is going to say? Reasons not, I haven't done it yet, reasons not to abide by the Constitution. So what are those? Oh, you're able to think on both sides. Oh, great.
Not everything's good for anybody, for everybody.
So this is going to be my not. Not everything is,
Yeah.
are you Ray?
Yes.
Not everything is good. Is that what you're saying? For everybody?
You're right.
And what do you mean by that, Ray?
All right. I didn't want to get into it, but I probably will. We're supposed to have freedom of religion,
Uh-huh.
and it seems like it's abiding by one particular sector, you know.
Uh-huh. So that there's elements in the Constitution, and I want to make sure, Ray, I'm understanding you, and I know you're saying, I don't know if I want to go into this, but am I hearing you say that there may be words and that actually what's happening, you feel there's a gap
Right.
between the ideals, we got principles on this other page,
Yeah.
and then there's a gap. So not everything is good for everybody. It's almost like, because what you're really, there's this gap between the ideal and how it's actually playing out.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're particularly concerned about freedom of religion.
Yes, it seems to be like it's, you know, people don't get along with other religions in the country,
Uh-huh.
and my religion's better than yours, or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So you have some concerns.
Yeah.
Right. And Ray is absolutely right to be concerned about religion. Probably the most contentious aspect of human beings living together throughout the course of history has been around trying to create, this is what really the big aspiration, trying to create a society that allows for many religions.
Right.
Pluralism. Religious
Yeah.
pluralism is
One
probably the
size.
hardest thing.
One size fits all, and it doesn't really work that way, I don't think.
So that would be this gap of like the Ray's wanting to point out. Other reasons not. And you were Jill?
Yes, I would say not so much, not so much, but to question.
Yeah.
To question, if it weren't for the amendment process, the original Constitution
Mm-hmm.
had many, many prejudices and limitations built into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, because the Bill of Rights, the original 10 amendments were constructed,
Mm-hmm.
we know that we can question and make changes to the Constitution,
Mhm.
make amendments to the Constitution.
Right.
So I was originally prejudicial
Yeah, okay, that's good.
against many groups of people.
Yeah, right.
And all of those groups have not been addressed, but at least we know that it's a work in progress.
So one reason not to abide by the Constitution, and you're in very good company by saying this, I have over there in my briefcase that I travel around with a singed Constitution. Because when I want to make a point, which you'll see in the presentation, William Lloyd Garrison was not happy with the Constitution. He burned it in 1850 in Framingham, Massachusetts. So, and he and many abolitionists did not believe in the Constitution. They did in the Declaration of Independence, but not in the Constitution because of, and we'll go into some of those details. Something else, yeah, in the back.
I'm not quite sure if this is the right place to raise this question, but the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
In light of what we've seen in the last several years, appearing in the public media and out of the mouths of public people, is there a reason to rethink the First Amendment,
Mm-hmm.
freedom of speech mainly, and what are the dangers of doing that?
So, and can you tell us your name?
Barry.
Barry, so is there something here on our other side? Do you think the First Amendment does not necessarily help us to become more civilized?
Well, I think it does. The First Amendment does, and I'm not saying that we need to remove it. What I'm saying is, or suggesting is, that we need to discuss it.
Okay, yeah, all right. Is the First Amendment up for discussion? I'm going to say it that way as opposed to, because you're really, along with Jill talking about the amendment process, that some of these things that are treated as if they were absolutes.
Yes.
And many times people, and I'll give talks on the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, there'll be different people who come to those talks, and each group is concerned that the amendment they care about is being misused. So we could say that about a lot of the Bill of Rights. But is it up for discussion? And that discussion might be an important thing for us to be doing more. Yeah. Do we have any other reasons why? Yes.
Chris, I would
Chris.
just say, the good thing and the bad thing is that it's open to interpretation.
Yeah. And Chris, who do you think is the interpreter?
These days, the Supreme Court.
Yeah, these days the Supreme Court. And
Supreme Court.
it's one of those issues, and we'll talk about that a little bit, in sort of a subtext to today's presentation. There's oftentimes the assumption that it must be the Supreme Court who decides what the Constitution means, when it is a product of we the people, and so therefore, there's a whole other way of understanding the Constitution, which is we are interpreting it. And that the Supreme Court, and something they call judicial supremacy, was something that doesn't necessarily belong in the Constitution. It's not stated that way, but something for us to be thinking about is who actually does that interpretation.
And that also upsets the balance too. If you're
Right.
if you're gonna give ultimate opinion or judicial judgment to the Supreme Court, then that supersedes everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to call that SCOTUS supremacy. And there's a great book came out in 2000, in the aughts, by Larry Kramer called Popular Constitutionalism. And he makes the argument that the left, in particular, had put too many hopes on the Supreme Court to change the world
Yeah.
and to advance freedom forward. And yes, that was the case. Starting in the Civil Rights Movement, the Supreme Court was used very effectively to push a progressive agenda. However, in doing so, Larry Kramer says, you gave the court way too much power. And you stopped thinking about working politically, democratically, talking to people. So that is one of our downsides, and that maybe it's something we need to talk about. I'll take one more, and then we'll go. Yes, and can you tell us your name?
Tyler,
Tyler.
what about the extreme difficulty of amending the Constitution? It
Yes!
takes so long.
And how hard is it, Tyler?
It's extremely hard.
Yes.
It takes a very long time,
It still hasn't.
and all the states have to agree on it, and
Yeah.
When was the ERS first suggested?
Yeah, the Equal Rights Amendment is being suggested from the audience, case in point,
Yeah.
right? That was started quite a while ago and still has not passed. Very hard to pass an amendment. Nice, okay. Well, let's get started because I think that some of the things we've talked about we're going to be addressing here. As I said, I like to go back to history. So we're going to go back to the founding and see what were some of the debates that people had originally. Were you able to hear me okay when I wasn't using the mic? Okay. Because it's easier for me to then, I have to touch my machine to make it respond. Okay, so, oops. The Constitution could not just be written and everybody wanted it. It had to be ratified. So it comes out of Philadelphia, the document is in place, and they need to take it through the states. And as Tyler said, it's a very involved process to amend. It was an equally involved process to ratify because they needed 3/4 of the states. There were 13 at that time. And they had to make sure, like, were people going to like this Constitution? So we're going back to the original Constitution, the one Jill was talking about. It has no Bill of Rights. It's just what's there. And people in Massachusetts, they took a look at it, and they had something to say. Let's see. First thing they didn't like, these are some, maybe they were Unitarians, I don't know, they were pastors in Massachusetts. And they did not like it that the elections were every 2 years. That's a long time. You put somebody into an important position, you give them 2 years, who knows what sort of trouble they'll come up with. So they were not happy. So this is what the House of Representatives, 2 years. Slavery had not been outlawed in the Constitution. They didn't use the word, but there's all sorts of little things there that make it clear that slavery, it may not be encouraged, but it certainly was not outlawed. And the pastors of Massachusetts were not happy. And here's a delegate from Plymouth County. I always think it's fascinating. Yes, they were worried about slavery, but there was something else they were really, really worried about, and that was money. Because 3 different vices. 1, desire for power in order to dominate. 2, desire for money, and you just become avaricious and greedy. And desire 3, sex. Okay, we're not surprised perhaps by that one. But this one sometimes doesn't get as much attention. Is this too far away for anybody to read? Does somebody want to read it out loud? Could I get a volunteer? Oh, great, thanks, Jill.
I think that the operation of paper money and the practice of privateering have produced a gradual decay of morals. As people become more luxurious, they become more incapacitated for governing themselves.
Yeah, a key problem for this whole idea of self-governance, of being able to create a republic, is that when people started getting awfully luxurious, not digging their own potatoes, not tending their own chickens, and just wanted to amass wealth, that this is where corruption began. So the whole possibility of a republic, they said early on, I don't think this is going to save us, because they have not gotten rid of slavery and they're allowing people to hold on to wealth. But then this farmer comes in. I always love it. This story comes up. I don't think I'm going to give you the whole one, but again and again in the ratification process, farmers come in. Somebody else want to read Josiah Smith? He's pretty great. Do I have any other volunteers? Okay, thank you.
When I saw this Constitution, I found it was a cure for these disorders, Shays' Rebellion. It was just such a thing as we wanted. I got a copy of it and read it over and over. I've been a member of the convention to form our own state constitution and had learned something of the checks and balances of power, and I found them all here. I did not go to any lawyer to ask his opinion. We have no lawyer in our town, and we do well enough without. I formed my own opinion and was pleased with this Constitution. But I don't think the worst of the Constitution because lawyers and men of learning and moneyed men are fond of it.
Yeah, thank you. And you, Chris?
Kathy?
Kathy, sorry. Yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, Kathy? Like, what kind of a guy do you think he is?
He just seems like a good old guy.
Yeah. Because
He's literate.
He's
I mean,
literate?
He's read it, he's
Yeah.
thought about it.
Exactly. And Kathy, you were the one talking about construction. Was it Chris that was talking about separation of powers? Like, that was a key thing, the balance of powers. And the whole business about you don't have to be a lawyer to have good political judgment. This is something I think sometimes we forget. I love lawyers. I wish I could be a lawyer. I would have liked to have been a lawyer. It was not my path. It's a long story. We don't need to go into it. But I think the reason I do this work now is to, and so if there are lawyers in this room, I love you. I wish I had your knowledge. However, Josiah Smith tells us you don't need to be a lawyer to have constitutional judgment. And if you are a lawyer, we won't hold it against you. That's the kind of man. Maybe. So, Massachusetts, there's a vote. Hey, this is not a slam dunk. Massachusetts, 187 yays, nays 168. One of the things Massachusetts did was they said, yes, we'll vote for the Constitution and we want a Bill of Rights, so get to work. They didn't make it conditional on the vote. Some states did that, or tried to. But that's what Massachusetts did. So Virginians. So Virginia's a slave state. And here are some of their concerns. We have Richard Henry Lee. Jill, do you want to read this one?
Sure. There is no Bill of Rights. Will the General Welfare Clause include slaves?
Yeah, so, the preamble says we the people, in order to, ensure the general welfare? Form a more perfect union, right? But then it gets on to, is that clause about the general welfare? When they say general, do they mean slaves? Richard Henry Lee was a little nervous about this. Richard Henry Lee is very important for the Declaration of Independence.
So does Richard Henry Lee want slaves to have?
No.
He's against it.
Well, when it was the Declaration of
Well, I feel like
Independence,
he's from Virginia.
Yeah.
Maybe not all Virginians were against
Right.
For slavery. So-
well, and Jill, I think your point is you're getting at something big here, because he was somebody who was all for freedom.
Okay.
And use
That's
all
what-
that
that's
language.
what I thought. That's what
Right.
I read it as.
And then there's that problem of how do we make a living when we have plantations? It's like, I don't want to burn fossil fuels, and I drove here. And I don't want to just make a false equivalence, but I do think to a certain degree, this is what, so he's nervous. Like, uh-oh, what's going to happen with that preamble? Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Somebody want to read what he had to say? Am I in the way?
Who authorized them to speak the language of we the people instead of we the states? The people gave them no power to use their name.
Right. So, and the Articles of Confederation, which preceded this was all about states. There was no amendment process, it's all about states. States came together, all the power was in the states. What is this preamble? We the people. That's a whole new line of political reasoning. And Patrick Henry is nervous. Patrick Henry, who also owned slaves, and maybe I have a picture of him. Oh, there he is. And who wrote a letter to a Quaker and said, I hope God forgives me. I know what I'm doing is wrong. So aware of it, Virginians, aware of it, can speak the language of liberty and are living a contradiction.
And also, we the people, realistically, at that time, was we the white men, landowners. It was no one else.
Right.
Sorry, I'm getting worked up already.
Jill, I think, that was your point originally about it was a very prejudiced, it was very exclusive. Yeah. But the fact that it said "we the people," and here's one of those crazy things. When you put the words on paper, then how do people read them?
Right.
And you may say, oh, it's only certain kinds of people. But if you start using that language, that idea gets out there.
And it came to bite them in the ass.
Oh, yeah.
Because the rest of the people said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And that's hence the Bill of Rights.
Hence the Bill of Rights. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're going to try and correct things. Again, there's a farmer comes to the rescue. Would you be willing to be the farmer, Chris? Kathy?
Sure. It is my lot to be among the poor people. The most that I can claim or flatter myself with is to be of the middle rank. I wish no more, for I am contented. My judgment is convinced of the safety and propriety of this system. This conviction does not rise from a blind acquiescence or dependence on the assertions and opinions of others, but from a full persuasion of its rectitude.
Yeah, right. So once again, we have a farmer who comes in, who's using common sense, who is looking at the structure that is being set out, and he is very clear to say, as many people understood farmers to be, that they were not blindly obedient. The thing about being a farmer is you were self-reliant. You made your own decisions. So therefore, you would necessarily have good political judgment, because you were not corrupted by money. So what happens in Virginia? They require a Bill of Rights in order to vote for it. So that's a motion. If you guys do your town meeting, you know somebody puts an amendment on, you have to go down the amendment road. And the amendment says 80 ayes and 88 nays. And because at a certain point, Virginia began to wonder, if they don't do it, how can we ask somebody to do something if it doesn't exist? So if you make an amendment to change something but it doesn't exist, you don't have a principle to make the change. So nobody really wanted the nays nobody wanted the ayes to win on this one because it would have been a parliamentary disaster. So they do ratify, and it's not it's not a landslide again. This Constitution gets through by a whisker. It could have been different. And as we see, this is what it took, and they only needed a certain amount. And New Hampshire, but nobody knew New Hampshire won until after Virginia and New York voted, because New Hampshire was kind of off the communications. So, yep, it took a lot. And this is going back to this notion that the Constitution can be changed, but the process for changing it is super hard. So I'm going to look at two things very quickly. Just why is it that the original Constitution also, and this gets back to Jill's original point about it being prejudicial, the original Constitution, even with the Bill of Rights, had two things that was very disturbing. First was Article 1, which lays out the power of Congress, Section 2, Paragraph 3, the notion to a 3/5 person. So the 3/5 person made it possible for slave states to have more representation and also get taxed more. So this was the compromise that was done, 3/5, and this was the presence of slavery in the Constitution. And then the second one, this is the Article 4, which lays out the states' full faith and credit, the relationship between the states and the federal government. It contained in paragraph 3, no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up upon claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. It's fairly legalistic, speaking for the Fugitive Slave Clause. So here were two things in the Constitution that made a lot of abolitionists very, very unhappy.
What about an indentured servant? Is that also the same
Well,
thing?
that would have covered that as well.
So later, when the immigrants started coming over from Ireland and were contracted to work for so many years before they were free people, was that also applicable to them?
Right, so Jill is asking, so does this go to people who are beyond slavery? Yes, anybody who was under a contract, who were indentured, who were brought under certain conditions, if those people tried to escape, other states had to return them. Same with convicts. If somebody escaped from prison, and at this time, the penitentiary system did not look like it does now. It was usually a work gang or something of that sort, so prisoners' labor was used. And if they escaped from the work gang, then the other state had to return it.
They had to be captured.
They had to be captured. Yeah, and there is some language in there that has due process upon claim of other party. But as far as the abolitionists were concerned, that was part of the the stain of slavery in the Constitution. So for that reason, William Lloyd Garrison, he's the one I was going to pull out my burnt Constitution. But and sometimes when I give this talk and we're outside or with high school students, I will light the Constitution on fire. Just to sort of show what that looks like. But nowadays that's not recommended. He says this in 1832 and he says it again and again. The Constitution is null and void, a sacred compact forsooth. It was a compact formed at the sacrifice of the bodies and souls of millions of our race, for the sake of achieving a political object, an unblushing and monstrous coalition to do evil that good might come. Such a compact was in the nature of things, and according to the law of God, null and void. Very legalistic terms. Null and void from the beginning. So he had nothing to do with the Constitution. Why should we have such a thing? And other abolitionists were trying to figure it out. Like, here's a convention. This is in Ohio. I think the picture is a convention that may be just after the war, but there was this ongoing question of, is the Constitution useful for achieving the ends of freedom? And this is 1851, Sixth State Convention of the Colored Citizens of Ohio. So these conventions were happening around the country. White conventions, abolitionists, black conventions, abolitionists. And they're trying to figure out what is going to be their strategy. And how does the Constitution fit into this? And many people at this convention said, like William Lloyd Garrison, we should not be relying on the Constitution. It's null and void. It's a covenant with death, an agreement with evil. The agreement with the devil, thank you. So would somebody be willing to read this argument?
I hold that the Constitution of the United States is pro-slavery, considered so by those who framed it and construed to that end ever since its adoption.
Yeah.
H. Ford Douglas.
Right, so there's one strong position. And here, is your name Sue?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to read this one?
You have confused the construction of the Constitution of the United States, the same as the Constitution itself.
Yeah, right. So sometimes this whole idea of interpretation, just because they said that's what the Constitution means, doesn't mean that was really the Constitution. And here's another one. Oh, and I think, Sue, could you keep going? This is another paragraph.
Sir, coming up as I do, in the midst of men in chains, and 500,000 only half free, I consider every instrument precious which guarantees to me liberty.
Yeah, everything that is speaking about freedom, I'm going to see that as precious. And that's what. So in this convention, just like with the ratification, The ayes had it, the Constitution is in. We're going to use the Constitution. So here is 1851. We are going to use this Constitution as part of the abolitionist movement. But not everybody was agreeing. Theodore Parker, now this is he's lecturing in New York. Am I right? Theodore Parker is a Unitarian?
Yes.
Isn't he a very important
Yep.
person? Yeah. Do you want to read what he has to say?
Yeah,
Oh, good. Thank you. And can you tell me your name?
Joy.
Joy. Great.
The slave power controls the president and fills all the offices. Out of 12 elected presidents, 4 have been from the north, and the last of them might just as well have been taken by lot at the south anywhere. Mr. Pierce, I just now said, I was Texan,
Was Texas?
I just said, was Texan in his latitude. His conscience is Texan. Only his cradle was New Hampshire.
Yes, thank you, Joy. Yeah. You know, Franklin Pierce, New Hampshire president. And Theodore Parker says, not so much. No. And what the term they used was the slave power. And the understanding was, if you get the 3/5 clause, there's a reason why these elections are running the way they're running. And that means that not only is the House of Representatives, the thumb is on the scale for the slave states, but because of the Electoral College, it means the election of the president is on the slave states, because the Electoral College matches the number in the House. So what Theodore Parker points out is, the Constitution has given us a slave power, which is destroying our country. Ergo, you don't want the Constitution. These are all legitimate arguments. I mean, and people are wrestling. Is the basis, is the recipe of this nation controlled by moneyed interests? That was a concern back in Massachusetts. Or is it a document for liberty? And we need to use it in order to free ourselves. Okay, so let us go to probably the biggest proponent of the Constitution, Frederick Douglass. And he, like now Howard Day, I think, Sue, is a man you read, he makes a similar argument. Let us not confuse what people do with it with what it says. Let's try and hold those two things. Amr, can I put you on the spot? Would you be willing to read this?
Oh, sure, yeah. The American government and the American Constitution are spoken of in a manner which would naturally lead the hearer to believe that one is identical with the other, when the truth is they are distinct in character as in a ship and a compass. The one may point right and the other steer wrong. A chart is one thing, the course of the vessel is another.
Yeah, thank you. And I just did a little picture just to show, like, we don't want to get confused. Is the Constitution the ship, or is the Constitution the compass? And Amr, if you could give us this last.
Shall we condemn the righteous law because wicked men twist it to the support of wickedness? Is that the way to deal with good and evil?
So, Frederick Douglass becomes the voice of a whole movement that says we are going to change the Constitution, not by changing its words, because that's a very hard process. The amendment process takes forever. We are going to change the Constitution because we are going to think it differently. We are going to believe in a different Constitution. We are going to see what it should be, and that's what we are going to expect. As opposed to saying, oh, we surrender our understanding of the Constitution to, say, the Supreme Court or somebody else. Because notice, none of these people who are talking about the Constitution right now are Supreme Court justices. These are average Americans who are arguing about it with each other and are thinking about it as if they were capable of making good political judgments. They did not need the Supreme Court to tell them how to read the Constitution. So on my last little piece, and then I'm going to stop the PowerPoint slide and open up for some conversations, and then talk a little bit more about the amendment process. This is from 1987. It's the bicentennial of the Constitution. There's a lot of discussion. Is the Constitution good? Is it bad? There's an exhibit going on. If you were going to sign the Constitution, would you do so now? 1987. There's politics in America. There's people who disagree. There's many people who say we don't like the Constitution, that it set up a whole situation for moneyed interests to control all of us. And then, here you may recognize her, Eleanor Holmes Norton. She said this at a big panel. Betty Friedan was there speaking against the Constitution. Does somebody want to read what she has to say? This will be our final read. Do I have any? Yes, great. Thank you.
The myth of the Constitution is in a very real sense the handiwork of black people who enjoyed it least. When there was nothing but racism, they believed those words. Because they believed them, they ultimately made them live.
Yeah, keep going, thank you.
Black people have to be at the forefront of those who celebrate the Constitution, not because it is perfect, but because they have made it more perfect. One of the worst things we could do in a time when so little brings us together is to try and debunk or destroy the one powerful myth that continues to animate this society, the myth of the great American Constitution.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I didn't get
Linda.
I'm sorry, what?
Linda.
Linda, thank you, Linda. Yeah, so here's another way to take this problem, is to say, if we believe in it, to be doing what we want it to do, that is what gives it the energy, the vitality that it needs to do the work to make us a more perfect union. And we can hold on to the language of the preamble to really say, well, of course, that's our job, we the people. So, yeah, let me take a break from the slides, because, let's see, is there a way, Bruce, to turn off the, thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this? This is sort of the premise is, we can all be debating this Constitution, probably in our best interest to be debating it, and how we think about it is going to have a lot to do with its vitality.
Isn't the real question is how do we affect change in the Constitution?
How do we affect change in the Constitution? Yeah. And what are you thinking?
What am I thinking? Well, I think it takes forever, 100 years to ratify an amendment, then it's going to move very, very slowly.
Yeah. Does that feel discouraging?
Of course.
Yeah.
Change is only change when you see it.
Right. We haven't had an amendment since, I think, the 1970s. And that was because undergraduate found one of James Madison's original 12 that never got out of the hopper. And he took it through the processes, and now Congress cannot vote itself a raise to get the raise before the next election. But we haven't had an amendment since then. So that's a little discouraging. Yeah.
Not the 25th?
What?
Not the one about a disabled president?
No, that's, let's see, let me grab a Constitution that's not been burned. Yeah, see, here's the one that's suffered.
Thought after Reagan was shot.
It was, yeah, so that's the amendment before that one. I don't have my glasses. Can you just tell us what the last amendment is? Yeah, the very last one.
Can you hear me through this?
Yeah.
No law varying the compensation for the service of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened.
Right. So that was the most recent one. Thank you very much.
What's the date on that?
And the date on that one is July 1st, 1971. the 27th Amendment. So we haven't had one since then. So that's a little discouraging. Yeah. I do have some very good news though, unless there's another question. There's a question because yes.
Question, comment, you know, reading the Eleanor Holmes Norton quote, and this idea of the myth of Constitution being so important. So you can get very inspired as a liberal reading that, but then you think about the Second Amendment and the people who believe the same thing she believes, right? That they are guaranteed any weapon they want, etc. So again, open to interpretation, good thing, bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to make sure that everybody gets to hear Chris, important question. It's one thing to look at what Eleanor Holmes Norton is saying about the myth of the Constitution, and if you really believe it, that makes it true. And if you love her message, you'd be inclined to agree with that. But what about people who are as vehement about the Second Amendment and those rights, and that they believe those to be true? So how do we deal with that is kind of what I'm hearing.
State by state.
You get these strict constructionist interpretations. And you're interpreting the Second Amendment based on
250 years ago.
200 years ago, you know?
Right. So then we get another point about the Second Amendment, particularly maybe the most recent Supreme Court decision where Justice Thomas goes way back in history, and it feels like what's going on. This doesn't seem like states are able to do one of their most important jobs, which is to provide for public safety. Yeah. So I do have an answer to that, in which maybe I should save it towards the end so that I can run out the door about how I might think about the Second Amendment. But Amr, you've got your hand up.
The thought that's coming to me is the difference between, the way I've been thinking about the Constitution, as you've explained in Magda, it's a game, rules for a certain game that we play, social construct, right? And so much depends, as I think, the person I was quoting, they said, on the people who are playing the game. So the fact, is it the Constitution to blame for the fact that we cannot keep people safe, or the fact that Congress cannot vote things in? Like, other countries have done that. Australia immediately did that. But there's a willpower in the population. These things don't stand in the way. So are we kind of fixating on the Constitution, whereas actually it's a question of culture? That not enough Americans believe that we want to get rid of their guns, whereas other places they're convinced by the death of children to give up the guns.
Right, and I want to make sure, just for people who might be watching this later on television, so Amr's point is that, is it really the Constitution or is it Congress? Because Congress could do something. And this will be maybe one little insert I'll do, is that I haven't read the most recent New York decision, Brune, I think is the shorthand for it, carefully. I have some sense of what was going on in that. But the cases that I have read carefully, the Supreme Court did not make it so that states could not regulate the manufacturing, the sale, nor the time, place, and manner of weapons. So the first decision, Heller, although I don't know why the newspapers don't do a better job of explaining this, but the very first decision that had to do with Second Amendment rights includes enormous restrictions. And that first one, Heller, is on the federal level, which it was basically an invitation to Congress, to go back to Amr's point, that they might regulate exactly the areas where Scalia said, this is where you should take care of it. But they did not. And then you have the question, Amr saying, is it a cultural issue? Is it a moneyed interest issue? I think those are reasonable questions. So we have the Constitution issue, which is one thing, and Amr is pointing out, and I think a number of people also said, the structure is what's so important. Knowing that it's a law, that these are rules, we can know what they mean, and that there's some sense that they're good rules. Because the ratification process was supposed to make it hard enough to pass that they would end up being good rules. So there's the rules of the game, and that's the Constitution. But then there's the players, and that's what we also have to be looking at. Yeah, you had your hand up.
Well, it's not only the way the rules or the, laws are pretty clear, but the Constitution is not always clear. You have a right to carry arms, but it does not say the limits of that right. Other people's rights end with when my rights begin. And everybody carrying all the weapons they want to interferes with my rights. And free speech and religion are all in that category. So we don't have a mechanism for, the court is supposed to do that, but the court lately has been saying, well, it's all on one side, or it's all on the other side. But you need to deal with the fact that there are multiple rights included in any of those. And that is a matter of education and culture, that things are not quite so simple. I don't know how we get there.
Yeah, right. So lots of good questions here about how can we actually get there, and concerns about rights. Like if these words, and they're written down, and those words say you have the right to bear arms, and the words say you have freedom of speech, and then how do people interpret that? How do we come to some public policy that's going to help us live together, knowing that some people feel very strongly about having access to weapons, and that for the state to take away their weapons is a very scary thing. Certainly the Black Panthers felt they should have access to weapons, and they were a self-defense party and very active at a time when they felt like the state's not protecting our people, we shall protect our people. The Second Amendment was super important to the Black Panthers. And I think it's one of those questions of, okay, the Constitution gives us the rules, gives us the rules to the game. How can we play it best to coexist? Yeah. And one, question in the back. Barry. Was it Barry?
Yes, thank you. Well, we had this lovely discussion, and talking about the Constitution as it affects our lives. We haven't really addressed the reasons why it doesn't look, why it seems to fail in so many ways. The Second Amendment being one of them. When in fact, we haven't introduced the idea of politics. And politics influences people in different ways, as well as wealth discrepancy. And I mean, you'll find radical thinkers, put radical in quotation marks, who believe that the entire government is operated by a handful of multi-billionaires. And there may be some truth in it. So how do we address that? How does that fit in to all of the rest of us? I have a solution.
Oh, Barry, what's your solution? Then I'm going to need to say some of your question, though. Can I repeat it, and then we'll find out what the solution is? So Barry's saying, yeah, we've been talking about the Constitution, but what about the politics behind it? What about the moneyed interest? What are we going to actually do about this? And I'm sorry if I'm giving it short shrift, but it seems like we may need to do something that's not going to have anything to do with the Constitution, is where I think you're going. But Barry, what is your solution?
Well, I don't have it right at the moment, but as many of you are aware, there are substances put into drinking water around the world, and in some places they're accepted, and in others there are objections, like fluoride. Okay. Well, I propose that one of us, not me because I'm not a chemist, one of us devise a substance that eliminates greed. And put it in the water around the world, and just imagine what the world would be like without that.
So Barry's idea, it's not such, I mean, this isn't so far-fetched. What can we do to make people less greedy? I feel like this is an ancient question. This is what Machiavelli down there, when he was exiled, he was reading the ancients and trying to figure out, how can we make people less greedy? Because greed always befuddles us, bedevils us, and makes us do things that are really not in our best interest. So Barry's suggesting there may be some sort of drug we could put in the, I don't know, my son might say ayahuasca, but I don't know about that, but some idea that we can totally change. Sorry, Linda.
Well, isn't that where religion came in?
Yeah.
So Linda's saying, yeah, religion is definitely a place to rethink values, to rethink the material concerns. And I think religion does play a place, have a role in all of this. Way in the back, because you haven't spoken yet.
How about putting into the water respect?
Putting respect into the water. That's great. How are you going to do that? Did you find the drug?
We had it years and years ago, years and years and years ago. We seem to have lost it somewhere in our journey.
Yeah, okay, and I'm going to let you have the last hand up. Yeah, Chris. Kathy, sorry, I kept doing that.
Yeah, I've been sitting here thinking for a good little bit about the construct of religion and the construct of the Constitution not being very far apart. And they work very well as long as everybody plays the right roles and abides by the same set of rules and doesn't get too far out on any side. Once people start jumping out, then you have fights and wars and all sorts of things, which I think is what we're seeing.
Yeah. So, Kathy, that is so true. That structure, that form, that sense of how do you build respect, because that's what you were asking for, and the key ingredient needs to be respect. Jill, I know I said I was going to last line, and then I'm going to show you my happy ending here.
But religion has often been the reason for waging war.
Yeah.
Religious beliefs.
Sure.
So, is religion the answer? Any number of religions.
But just within one.
Here would be what I would want to propose. I would like to say that structure and form and rules help us, because that way we have to abide by the rules of the game, which means even if we don't respect the other players, and I've just taken up pickleball and I love it, but I know exactly how to win. Oh, I want to win, but I always have respect for the other players. So there's something about the excitement of playing in this game, knowing what the rules are, even though it's so silly. So here's something that I would like to just bring to your attention, because I don't think it got much notice in the last 6 months. And this is my concluding remarks, and it's going to solve the problem while we're waiting for Barry to find this magic drug. In the meantime, 3 teams got together at the National Constitution Center. There was Team Conservative, Team Libertarian, and Team Progressive. Has anybody heard of this? They came up with 5 amendments for the Constitution that they all agreed to. Team Progressive, I have to reinforce this, Team Conservative, and Team Libertarian, they all want to change the Constitution in 5 ways. The first thing they want to make possible is that it's easier to become president. They're going to expand presidential eligibility so that you do not need to be born in the United States in order to run for president. And, what was his name? California. Such a great movie star and governor. Schwarzenegger could run. If we can pass this, people, this is what's waiting for us. So that's number 1, presidential eligibility. Number 2 is legislative veto. This is a fairly complex one, but it basically is putting back the power in Congress to be able to do more veto, because a Supreme Court decision reduced what Congress can do with respect to the legislative veto. So I won't go into that one in too much detail, but if you're interested, I can send you a link. This next one might be of great importance to you. Impeachment. They want to make it harder to bring articles of impeachment, harder, easier to convict. Because, isn't that beautiful? And all three teams, they don't like how easy it is to bring articles. And then you never can convict.
Yeah.
So they're going to raise the bar on the impeachment articles and lower the bar on conviction. This next one I think you'll also love. Remember, I'm not just talking about Team Progressive. All three teams agreed to these. Judicial nominees. The Supreme Court nomination process. Every president should have 2 appointments per term. Each term should not be longer than 18 years. The number of justices on the Supreme Court will stop at 9. So you can't do a court packing, but this would completely change the whole dynamics. Change the rules of the game. The presidential campaigns are going to look a lot different because it's not going to be about getting somebody on the Supreme Court. Everybody gets 2. And finally, this one you'll just adore. Make it easier to amend the Constitution. Yes! And again, they've gone into all sorts of numbers so that it doesn't make it this high bar, nor does it make it so that states with lots and lots of people in them are actually at a disadvantage. So, yeah, these teams are putting this forward. I think it should get a lot of attention. I think there should be a major movement forward to say we want to change the Constitution because we want to talk about the Constitution, because we have good political judgment. So, yeah, Jill.
Did this group talk about the Electoral College at all?
Because they wish to change, what is it? It's underneath one of the provisos where they start to say around, and I can't remember which one it is, but we need to change the House of Representatives, and that will change the House, that will change the Electoral College. This group is not as strong on that as some other groups that are working to try and change the number of members in Congress, which would then have a change on the Electoral College. So it's fine-tuning the rules, but we could have some great results. So anyway, thank you very much for coming out. Really appreciate participation.
Thank you for an engaging and energizing, and I would dare say hopeful presentation and for the dialogue. By the way, Professor Mott will be back early in April to talk about hate speech in a free speech society.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be, I think, the first time in April.
And I don't have enough of these, but if anybody wants, I make these. My friend Merrick Bennett is a comic artist, and so this is a little mini about what is this thing, the U.S. Constitution, and it'll tell you how you can get in touch with me or with Merrick, and our little effort to try and get more people to actually believe in the Constitution as their thing, not the Supreme Court's.
Thank you.